Good afternoon. Welcome to what's kind of a podcast slash webinar. Tomas and I are going to riff a bit, which we find is a more natural way to have a conversation with a partner and allow the audience to participate with some questions. And we'll do this thing live on the fly rather than putting a canned presentation in place. So getting started with connected TV advertising, I'd like to welcome our first and only guest of the event. So Tomas, welcome to the program and glad to have you here.
Thanks for having me. Peter, you got a great podcast voice.
Thank you.
It's real solid.
It's one of the few things I can do well is talk. So I'm the Chief Revenue Officer here at NetSertive, and our guest is Tomas Rodriguez. And Tomas he's got a cool title. He's the Director of TV Partnerships at the Trade Desk. So his job is to work with different TV publishers from traditional broadcasters to also folks who are really focused on the digital market and make sure that their inventory is available to be sold through the Trade Desk. So that's how we partner. So Tomas, welcome. Why don't you give a background for how long you've been at the Trade Desk and we'll jump in.
Yeah, for sure. I've been programmatic for 10 years or so, basically straight out of school. And then at the Trade Desk, I'm rounding out towards my 6-year mark. Okay. So I joined the Trade Desk actually on the marketing team, product marketing. So that was really cool. I got to get to know all the different nooks and crannies of the platform and how we position. And then I kind of pivoted into TV partnerships as CTV began to grow and we needed to talk to all the big networks and folks.
Well, great. And you've been around almost as long as CTV's been around. And we'll get into some of the nomenclature.
Feels like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, it's strange, Tomas, I have kids your age. So for me, it feels like, I remember a TV with a dial on it and no remote. So you might not remember what that's like.
My grandparents had one. Yeah.
Oh, that's nice. Thanks. That feels great. So this is meant to be interactive. Jason is on producing this for us. So as you submit questions, we can take those on the fly and try to incorporate them into the discussion. So let's jump in with our first question for Tomas and then see where we go from there. So, all right, here we go. First of all, quickly, we're going to have Jason describe what the Trade Desk does, and I'm going to give you a quick background in NetSertive so you can understand how this all fits together if you are a digital marketer. So NetSertive is a full-service digital agency, and that's all we do is digital. We're not a creative agency. We're not a branding agency. We don't make your logo look sexy. We just take that logo and get it everywhere. And why we wanted to talk about CTV, as some people maybe mistakenly refer to it as OTT, we believe it's a really important part of a comprehensive digital campaign structure. And we've come up with some unique ways. We're writing code back and forth with the Trade Desk to do this that gets your intention a little bit lower in the funnel than people might think. This is not just awareness. We do this on a performance basis. And when we tie it into a full integrated campaign, we see some amazing results that allow you to look at attribution in a very different way with connected TV. So that's a bit of our story. Tomas can kind of walk you through what the Trade Desk does, and that might set the stage for the rest of the discussion.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks. So Trade Desk is a demand-side platform. Basically what that means in the advertising world is technologies like NetSertive, agencies, brands, they use our platform to purchase digital advertising space. We also offer a couple different other services, like you can use the Trade Desk to slice and dice your audiences using our DMP. We have a PMP, and that's basically what we're going to be talking about today, which is how you guys as buyers and technologies create connections into the best inventory available, from the broadcasters to like streaming audio players. That is all happening. A lot of it's happening in the private marketplace. We have a lot of different other pieces that go to our platform when agencies and brands use it. Like we have some AI that helps you do optimizations and drive performance, some planning tools that help you forecast, and then APIs, and that's where really NetSertive comes in. Is that's their plugin. We like to say with our API and technology partners, we have kind of the scale and the access, and then they have the secret sauce, and combined that it creates a really good niche solution for specific buyers out there. So yeah, that's the Trade Desk.
Well worded, Tomas, appreciate that. And this next slide kind of describes what we do with the Trade Desk. So our unique proposition is we're very, very focused on people doing digital marketing that might have a lot of locations that people physically go purchase their product or service. that could be combined with an e-commerce platform as well. And today, obviously, as the world changed in March, a lot of people have to figure out how to live in both those worlds. So this example here shows if I'm purchasing a boat, this is a standard piece of footage that Bass Pro Shops or White River Marine Group would supply us. But you notice that ad is localized entirely around the store in the location where I happen to be viewing that video or that content. So we can take that asset, localize it, which allows us to do a lot of custom things. So it's performance-based. We do measure ROI, and we can combine this with a search, display, or YouTube or other different mixture campaign, which really allows us to make sure that wherever your potential buyer is, we're showing up. And certainly now with CTV, people are spending a lot more time there than they were before. And I think, Tomas, correct me if I'm wrong, the CTV market has now overtaken traditional cable-based television viewing.
We think it's heading in that direction. That according to our data, we believe that there's going to be, at the end of the year, there's going to be 80 million connected television households and just below 80 million linear television households in the US. So yeah, you have that right.
The trend is powerful because it allows you to do a lot more with your ad content than just trying to figure out if you can put it in front of a Nielsen rating, right? So it's a lot more programmatic.
Yeah, and what I love what you guys do is in television, we usually talk about households. We usually start with 120 million. Mm-hmm. That's how many television households are in the United States. And then we start working backwards. But your clients don't need to reach 120 million. They need to reach a very specific amount or a focused amount of households. And that's what you guys specialize in.
Yeah, and we're trying to reach the person sitting on the couch looking for a specific product to see that specific ad. Right. And the local aspect of dynamic creative. So we can test creative ads a lot faster than you can in traditional television. We can also test content and overlay. And then we'll do some things later in the discussion that talk about how we can dynamically represent products and services based on inventory or understanding where that person was searching in some other places. So it's really, really targeted. So I appreciate that. Let's jump into the next slide and start with some questions. So Tomas, why CTV and why now? And then maybe you can help people understand the difference between CTV and OTT.
Yeah, absolutely. So OTT as a term came first.
Okay.
And it probably came around the time that Hulu and YouTube were on the rise. So let's say that was 7-8 years ago. And so when Hulu started coming up, and really the big four broadcasters, the three-letter networks, the ABC, CBS, NBC, and Fox, they were like, oh, people want to watch video content online. We got to do something about this. So they all huddled together and they created Hulu. And essentially, Hulu was the way that consumers like us or viewers like us could watch full episode TV content without going through our big cable boxes and our satellite boxes. And that was where OTT came about, is like over the top, or like, how are you circumventing around your cable box to still get access to the content? And then when the Roku hockey puck came out and the Apple TV came out, those sat directly on top of the cable box. And so that's where over the top comes in. Okay. But it's generally turned into a term where it's any way you're accessing TV content around that satellite, around that cable box. So it's a pretty broad term. If you're watching if it's Sunday morning, you're watching Saturday Night Live via your laptop, that's over the top. Mm-hmm. But then we talk about connected TV. So as the Rokus and Amazon Fire Sticks started coming up, and we're really what we're focusing now on is a device type. So the big screen, the big TV in the household, that is the connected television. So if OTT is a bigger term, CTV can sit as a large chunk under that umbrella.
Understood.
And I think between both of our companies, the way we define CTV from an advertising perspective is, yes, the TV device, the connected TV device, but also television content. Mm-hmm. We're not really messing around with pre-roll ads on the big screen or display ads on the big screen. We really want the TV content, that the commercials that sit in ad pods on the TV screen. I think that's how both of us define CTV advertising.
Certainly, and CTV far outweighs the estimations and slow response time you get out of traditional linear TV advertising. but it still has all the premium content. So it's just a much more powerful platform for people to shift their dollars towards.
It's really the crazy thing. When we were first launching CTV, our offering, that was maybe September of 2017. Basically, all we said was like, can you imagine, as a TV buyer, isn't it crazy that you can serve a commercial and then you can actually do something afterwards? You can report on it. You can retarget this person who just saw your commercial for the first time ever, rather than sending someone a TV commercial and then just being like, I wonder if that worked. Now you can actually have answers to that question. It's still novel. It was novel at the time, but it's still novel.
Well, and what we're working with you on gives us the ability to dictate what commercial we actually serve them based on their previous behavior, which is completely radical.
And I was going to say, a lot of people have talked about that concept, but it was so cool to learn that you guys are actually doing it.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to talk about that soon.
We'll tease it out a little bit later. So the next question we're going to get into is, how is it typically layered? How do you layer CTV into a marketing strategy? When you guys are talking to customers that might have a comprehensive offline, online, traditional digital structure, what are the things you're having them consider before they put this together?
Sure. So I'll talk about maybe how we did this last year and how it's changed this year. So we all know the marketing funnel. We all know generally how the channels fit in the marketing funnel. So if I'm selling, if I'm a car dealership in a local market or something like that, the bulk of my money traditionally last year would go to television spots, linear television spots through the local news station or something like that. That's where I spend the bulk of my money. Maybe there's some outdoor. And generally, we're trying to build awareness. We want people to know that local Toyota dealership is here in Raleigh. And then as people start, engaging with that content, maybe we're looking at cheaper channels like radio, still in the awareness category, but getting further down the funnel, maybe more targeted, like a specific radio station or something like that. Then as people are showing interest, as they're visiting our website, or as they're searching about Toyota in Raleigh online, that's when we're really starting to get into the driving sales part of the funnel. We do retargeting or search or something like that. Last year, I would say CTV sat right in the middle of those, where you have your awareness strategy on top and your direct sales or direct response on bottom. CTV, because it had the addressability of a display ad, it was, kind of down here, but the investment still required, it was still significant enough to think of it as awareness. So it kind of sat right here. That's last year. That's how I saw a lot of advertisers plan out where CTV. This year, because of what we just talked about, because of more connected TV households becoming part of the US and less linear households becoming part of the US, advertisers are starting to flip that a little bit. They're starting to say, how much can I spend on connected TV first? Because when I'd spend on connected TV first, I actually get to choose my audience as opposed to a spray and pray strategy.
Yep.
How much can I spend here first? And then I'll go to maybe my local news station, or then I'll go to my billboards. Really interesting, definitely flipping its model on its head type of stuff. So it's still an awareness strategy, but you can actually really focus in on the audiences that you want with this awareness strategy. And then what you guys are showing is that you can actually drive response here too. Maybe you do need a couple display banners to follow up, but it can drive action.
Yeah, and I think what we're shooting for is this becomes a two-way street. Right, initially you were looking at CTV at the top of the funnel to drive awareness. Now you can actually dictate what you're showing from a CTV perspective based on the behavior of people in the rest of your funnel. So what display ads they're interacting with, what search terms they're going after. Maybe they're looking for a particular vehicle. You can present that vehicle back to somebody in an ad in their home, and they're thinking, 15 minutes ago, I just looked for that car, and there it is in an ad in front of me with the local phone number of the dealer I can purchase it from. So when that's where it becomes really powerful for an advertiser and for the customer. If they have 25 dealerships, which a lot of our clients do, They don't want to build an ad for every dealership. We can do that for them on the fly and tap into their inventory feed and dynamically create this content and make it much more purposeful and interactive.
Totally. And I think what you're describing is really what we've wanted advertising to get to for a long time, which is a conversation. As you show them different vehicles, they show you maybe which way they're leaning and their intent. So it sharpens your ability to continue that conversation. And I think for a long time, advertising's been a little bit of a megaphone or blowhorn.
Correct.
And now there's a call and response here. There's a dynamicism. Maybe I almost got that right.
You got it. Well, you're right. So it actually, what happens is you're now giving that potential consumer something there's value there. It's not spray and pray. You're saying, oh, this is what you're interested in. Let me present that information to you. It's very different. Like you said, the megaphone's a great analogy. So let's jump to our next question and see how it builds on this. What are some of the things you see coming out of CTV? You mentioned some things a year ago and how different they are. Where else do you see this headed?
The big so I should maybe start here, is that something that you guys do really well and one of our core offerings. The reason why people decide to go through our companies as opposed to write a check to Hulu directly, they can still buy Hulu through us, or why they would want to, write a check to Roku directly, is because control. And control comes in a couple different facets for people. Sometimes it's audience targeting. Sometimes they've said, hey, these are the people who are in market for a boat right now. I want to spend as much on them first before moving into a kind of a wider model. Number one is audience targeting. Number two is frequency capping. I think, especially at the national brands that I work with, they get really scared that they're bombarding consumers. And in linear television, they don't really have control over how many exposures per household. So I think we all see a lot of insurance commercials, I would assume. Like that's where a lot of other verticals, that's good for insurance. A lot of other verticals don't want to replicate that. So that's the second reason, frequency capping. And the last one is measurement or attribution, is to be able to show someone, if you just cut a check to Hulu, maybe you won't be able to do the showed someone an ad, saw that they went to my website connection, that attribution connection. So those are the three foundational pillars that we see on why people walk through our doors. And usually the new fun stuff just builds on top of that.
Sure.
So the emerging feature would be like live sports. Live sports is something that broadcasters are starting to get more and more comfortable saying, yeah, I'm okay with giving programmatic some of my Sunday night football. I'm okay with college football becoming available programmatically, because I know that programmatic buyers are willing to pay a premium if it's the right ad for them. So live sports is a big emerging feature. Some of the emerging features that we have for us that I'm sure you guys are going to be adopting to is more dialed in viewer experience controls in regards to frequency. So we used to have a frequency setting that said no more than, and then you can customize the setting, 3 exposures over 1 day. But now we've added another wrinkle to that. So it's not only no more than 3 exposures in 1 day, and then you could say no more than 1 exposure over 30 minutes. So you're really having control over how to pace out your messaging to the consumer. There's a ton of other features. Anything in particular, like any?
Yeah, so we just received a question from one of the attendees, and it ties back to your comment about live sports, particularly. Let's just pick college football as an example. And the question is, how does geographic targeting work on CTV? And I'm thinking about knowing that, by the way, we live in the ACC. So I'm thinking about Clemson playing, Florida State. I know exactly who's going to be watching that football game. And I know that the demographic, I know the buying tendencies. So now the ads I'm serving up in that process, I can plan them out ahead of time and change my whole digital funnel along search, display, video, and social to tie in with this. And that's one of the things we try to do with the trade desk is we give that customer, you mentioned before, purchasing through one of our partners like ourselves, we're helping that customer pull the levers and say, you know what, we have found that during this period of time, you want to amp up a little bit on CTV and pull back, let's say on Facebook. And then the following week, you want to crank up on display. So that's where we're helping them get the best return on investment, because we're tying that back to an actual purchase versus perhaps some awareness stuff. So that help us understand how the geographic targeting ties into what you just described.
Sure thing. There's a lot of technology that goes into being able to say, if let's say an Oracle, a data partner Oracle, has said this group of IDs are in market for a pickup truck. It takes a lot of technology to take those groups of cookie IDs that are essentially web-based and turn them into actionable CTV devices. So you can match up devices to cookies. Part of that connection has to do with an IP address. So whenever there's an advertisement available, let's say you are watching Florida State versus Clemson, and what would that be? That would be ESPN. So like ESPN sends a bid request over to the Trade Desk technology. There's a lot of metadata that is sent over. It talks about what's the time of day, sometimes it tells us Raleigh, North Carolina, but sometimes it'll just give us an IP address. And that IP address can essentially just be mapped to a geolocation. So it's been standard in industry practice for 10 years using IP as a location based. Sometimes there's alternative data points used, but that's the primary data point.
Excellent. So Tomas, another question from Brian, and it gets back to the ad frequency. So he says, if you're targeting consumers in a market and you send them a relevant ad, why would you lower the frequency of that ad? I think potentially you talked about this, but maybe drill down a bit further.
Sure. Your audience here is more of a direct response. They're closer to the sale. However, for let's say tier 1 auto, not tier 2 instead of tier 3. If we're going to tier 1 auto, the manufacturer's advertising budget, they might not want to bombard an audience with too many trailblazer ads.
Yeah, and Tomas, Brian corrected me. He said he actually added a hyphen in between in and market. Okay. So in market is a little bit different. That's definitely
a little bit different. Yeah.
Yep. It's a good question, yeah. Brian. Thanks for the clarification.
Yeah. In market, you might be one more commercial away from getting them onto the dealership lot.
Bingo. Yeah. And he's right. So, and I think that depends both on the brand itself, what their goal is, and then understanding. Brian's exactly right. When someone's in market, you want to be driving that up and getting them in front of them.
And you said his name was Brian?
Yes.
So one thing that's interesting, Brian, about controlling frequency, it's not just a consumer experience value proposition. It's also making sure that your dollar goes further.
Right.
If you have no frequency controls whatsoever and you keep bombarding somebody who is just not interested in buying an SUV at that point, then that means your dollars are not going towards driving sales. But if you do have a frequency cap, let's say you meet your cap of 3 exposures over one day, that means your next dollar is going to a new audience. So frequency control also helps you achieve reach. It's not just about preserving the user experience.
Great answer. And I think also with CTV, you have the ability to do some testing here and see the reaction in the rest of your digital funnel for customers that are truly in market. So I'm gonna jump in. We've got 2 more questions that came in. Wendy asked, and this is a good question, can you explain programmatic buying versus the alternative, and then what is the alternative?
Sure. Usually in my line of work, we say you're either doing programmatic or you're doing direct buy.
Okay.
Direct buy, programmatic buy. Direct buy is what I was talking about earlier, where let's say you have a Hulu sales rep. I don't know why I'm picking on Hulu. Let me. I want to spread the wealth a little bit.
Okay.
Let's just say a Pluto TV is a big CTV player. So let's say you have Pluto TV sales rep calls you up and says, "Hey, we have this great service." They do have a great service. We have this great service. You should purchase 1 million impressions on my platform, and we'll make sure that we'll add these type of targeting structures around it. And then you essentially what that concludes in is you signing an insertion order. An insertion order is we're buying 1 million units for this amount of price, and it's going to happen over 30 days. That would be a direct sale. Programmatically, you can still buy Pluto, but essentially you're asking a technology or an agency like Netsertive to find Pluto in the Trade Desk technology platform. And what that allows you to do is it allows whoever's buying that inventory to have a lot of control and to make a lot of optimizations and to be able to really easily say, you know what, for some reason, this time around, Pluto's not working for me. So I'm going to pivot these dollars into CBS. I'm going to pivot these dollars into Animal Planet. So it just gives you a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more control. And that's how you squeeze out performance.
Great. 2 more questions and we'll jump to the next topic on the presentation. So this one's from an anonymous attendee. Could be my mother. She loves to jump on these things. You never know. Would there be scenarios where you want to run only CTV and then not run linear or radio?
Oh, that's really interesting. If you have a small budget.
Understood.
If you have a small budget, or if your budget is like, if you have a really large budget and your goal is driving awareness, let's say you're a new dealership in town and nobody's ever heard of you before, like you want to use all the awareness channels you got. But if you're established, for some reason, the marketing budget's a little bit smaller this year. If you take that small budget and you give it to like your linear local TV station, it's going to have an impact, no doubt about it. But it's probably a lot of those dollars are going to go towards people who aren't ready to buy a car.
Okay.
So if you have a small amount of budget, you want to make sure that budget reaches the exact right people.
Mm-hmm.
So that might be a reason why you would use programmatic connected television as opposed to the other awareness channels.
Budget's a great question. So another question that popped up, and this is a longer question, so I can repeat it if you need me to Miles.
Sure.
It's been previously stated that CTV could be an alternative to avoid the increased cost you would see on traditional during high cost periods. We just went through an election, the holidays. With the growth in CTV, is that still accurate? Is it still considered a lower cost alternative to traditional during these peak times?
Good question. There's so much happening in the linear prices versus CTV prices marketplace right now. Sorry, I'm probably going to give you more than what you asked for here. So
sure, no
just
problem.
Be prepared. Linear ratings are down this year, and they've been steadily going down over the last 5 years. But this year, especially because as people maybe lost their jobs or their wallets are tightening up a bit, they've canceled their cable boxes or their cable subscriptions. So if you just like go on the Nielsen website and you look at the highest rated shows of last year, like The Voice and Sunday Night Football and stuff like that, ratings are pretty significantly down. What that means for linear television costs, advertising costs on linear television, is that linear television used to be really, really cheap, but now they're steadily getting more expensive because there's less inventory available. You know, as what do you call it? As supply goes down and demand stays steady, prices have to come up. Mm-hmm. However, today, right now, connected television prices are more expensive than linear. The reason why you still want to go with connected television is because you have to have the conviction that the way that you're going to use those in a targeted manner, you're going to use those for specific audiences for a specific time of day that's performing better than other times of day. You have to be willing to tell yourself the control I'm getting here that is going to be more sophisticated than a spray and pray is going to be more valuable than the more bargain prices over here. But as I mentioned before, as the linear ratings continue to go down and those prices go up and more eyeballs shift to digital and connected television, which means an increase in supply, an increase in supply and demand is staying steady, then the prices are going to come down here. So we have a working theory at the Trade Desk that in 2 years, or not in 2 years, but maybe 2 to 4 years, there's going to be an even playing field of CPMs. But you don't want to wait until that time to start getting really sophisticated about this stuff. You want to be able to ask yourself the challenging questions now. is
Yeah.
this worth the control I'm getting?
And it leads to the next question. There's two more questions that have come in that actually lead to this next slide that I've got. So I'm going to ask these and see if we can follow up. So Ara, I'm going to see if I pronounced that correctly, ARA. So Ara asked, what standard length video ads work best or are acceptable? 6 seconds, 10, 15, 60, other. And then this gets to the next question. How do you measure? What are the measurable KPIs that you'd be looking for in this situation?
Awesome. Okay, so first one, length. You could basically repurpose your exact linear assets and be just fine. There's more 15 and 30s in the marketplace than there are 60s. And then the last bit are 90s and 6s.
Okay.
So I'm talking seconds length here. So if you had to invest in one length, I would say 30 seconds your best bet.
Okay. Good.
If you do go 60s and 90s, some publishers are gonna increase the prices on you a little bit because you're taking more advertising in their ad pods.
Picking up other slots.
Yeah, and I think the next one's KPI. Is that right? If you're with an assertive, your KPI is going to be very action based. It's going to say, did this CTV ad drive a site visit? And so we would call that CPA, cost per action. But there's also a lot of different solutions you can use. There's third-party measurement companies that are available. That if you already had an existing return on ad spend model. So if we could see that someone physically visited the dealership lot, how much is that worth to you? We can then do a customized return on ad spend model. So, did you net out? Did your advertising dollars get you more value than what you actually spent? Those are the really cool, you're doing advertising, you're doing three-dimensional chess type of advertising. But I only see that maybe 25% of the time. I think people are still figuring out their own KPIs. They're still doing cost per completed view or completion rate, more awareness-based metrics. But our hope, and I think we share this, is that people move more towards action-based, cost per action type of mentalities.
That's great. And I've got two more questions I want to pull in. I'm going to get to Shelby's question in a minute. She's got a question about a very specific demographic, but I'm going to go to Lena's question because it ties into the slide we have here. So hopefully I'll be able to get back to Shelby here in a second. So how should CTV be integrated with the rest of a digital marketing strategy? And what are some innovative ways of creating synergies? So that's kind of what we're doing together, right, Tomas, which is really putting together a comprehensive platform. So we have, it's the right way to describe this without getting too technical. NetSertive has a thing we called AMC. It's our platform, and we connect to all of our digital channels. So, whether it's Google, Bing, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, whatever it might be, that's also integrated into our Trade Desk connection. So that allows us to build out very specific campaigns and very specific audiences. As Tomas described before, you can get down to a very, what I'll call, tightly integrated strategy for a specific event, a specific program, or specific audience. So the way we would describe it is not one single answer, Lena. Probably the best way we would do is sit down with you and say, who's your target audience? Where's the best place you found to reach them before? What product or service are you selling? And what's your budget look like? And then our team typically comes back after some very detailed analysis. And the analysis includes your competition, what they're doing in those particular areas or on those particular products. And then we build out a campaign, and typically we'll get in and test the waters for 60, 90, 120 days across all channels. And then we'll come back and share with you what the ROI is across that entire platform. And the benefit, Tomas indicated this early, our job is to get you the best return, whether that's Hulu or one of the other services out there. The same thing for us, whether that's Google or Facebook or YouTube, we don't care. So we're going to sit down with you and say, here's what's performing best. What we have found that's interesting is for some of our customers, a specific product might perform very, very well through Google search, but not as well in Facebook. That same company might have a different product. You could flip those around. So it's not one size fits all, never, in fact. And we'll get into that level of detail and help you figure out what a comprehensive digital strategy looks like. And we'll come back and say, we're not maybe getting the performance we want out of CTV. We'll double down on display. And that's the answer. So I think it's a little bit complex. We'd be happy to talk to you about that, Lena, but it's a really good question. So Tomas, I'm going to go back to Shelby's question. I don't want to skip over that. I love this question, by the way, because I'm almost in this demographic. It's scary. What would you recommend to a smaller company that is looking to get involved in CTV, but has an older demographic of 65 plus, who isn't quite there yet? And this company happens to sell hearing aids. So what would your path for this organization be to get there?
Aim small, miss small. That's kind of, yeah. You don't, if you're looking at that specific demographic, and I think it's a really fair question, because you kind of have to ask your question, is that demographic going to be the ones that hold on to their cable packages the longest, who aren't converting to Amazon Fire Sticks and Roku devices quite yet? The data suggests yes. If you go on eMarketer and you look at demographics who are adopting CTV at faster rates, that demographic is the slowest. And I think that's pretty obvious to everybody. So what I would suggest to do is do an aim small, miss small. Do a test where you're targeting CTV devices, but you're layering on. We work with a lot of data partners, and you guys do too, like Oracle, Blue Kai. If these don't sound familiar, that's totally okay. Just know that they're reputable companies who their job is to segment IDs that are focused in on this demographic.
Right.
Take that audience, target them, and let's just start with a small budget, and let's see if it drives the actions that you're looking for.
That's right. And I think, Shelby, back to the question Lena had asked previously, I think ultimately is we don't want to just lean in on a tool because, quote unquote, it's sexy. We want to put your money in the place that's going to drive the best return. So to Tomas's point, we might try it, see what the results look like, and we might come back and say, hey, I think Facebook's still performing best for you. And then we keep testing and iterating and coming back to what drives the best return.
And I would love to hear, if you guys end up doing it, I would love to hear the results, because even though the common knowledge or convention is going to tell us that demographics going to be hard to reach with connected TV households, the multi-generational household that is happening now, especially as the economy has shrunk a little bit, put pressure on the wallets, does mean that you have grandmother and grandchildren in the same household. And so technology adoption can cross the demographics there.
Well, my mother-in-law was extremely frustrated with me that she couldn't get Hallmark TV on YouTube at my house.
No.
So it actually became a moment in the house, and I think she went back home and just watched it there. So it's very interesting how this is all changing.
Hallmark TV does have a Roku app, I think.
They do, but it depends on who your TV provider is still. So
got it.
It's challenging. I've got another good question here. This is back to the attribution discussion. So Brian asks, if I'm currently running CTV with another agency who only reports on impressions, reach, and completed view percentage, what questions should I be asking them to determine if it's really performing well?
Wow, really good question. Actually, love this question. So I'm going to, and let me just write this down right here. Sorry, I just want to make sure I cover the whole thing. Okay. The first thing I would suggest is what matters to you. That's the first thing you have to ask yourself. If driving action matters to you, that's what you have to ask. Show me that this is driving action. If they can't, then maybe it's time to explore what other options are out there. So if what matters to you is being alongside premium content, making sure that your brand logo is right next to Discovery, is right next to NBC, is right next to Hulu, then you need to ask for transparent supply reporting.
Okay.
Where, I don't want to know how many impressions I ran. I want to know where my impressions ran by network, by net or broadcaster network or whomever. Maybe brand is or maybe positioning is important to you. Maybe action is important to you. Maybe education is important to you. Like if this is if you're at the position where you're saying, hey, I'm not necessarily sure what to ask for next. It might be as easy as asking them like, hey, can you educate me? Can you educate me on what similar clients like myself, what are they doing? What are they looking at? It's a new industry. It's in its adolescence.
Well, and
We're all
Tomas,
learning, and it's
I think to your earlier point, if they're doing this in a vacuum, they might not know, right? So
sure,
if
sure.
you've tied this and integrated this with the rest of your digital campaign structures, you should be looking for correlations, right? When you're investing in CTV, you
Good
should
point.
be looking at how it's impacting the rest of your campaigns and to see what that performance looks like. And that has to do sometimes with, common assets, common messaging, and then coordinated campaign structures. So I don't know that if you just did it in a vacuum, unless you're baselining this, you'd have that answer. You wouldn't know what to compare it to. So that's a great response, Tomas.
I think that's a really good point. Comparing it with your other channels is a great idea.
So the next topic, I've got a couple of questions up here that are interesting. So does CTV include inventory? And this is from Karen. Does it include inventory on the on-demand programming that is also offered by cable systems? Are they comparable?
Whoa, this is really advanced question, actually. So I should say, let's draw a line in the sand real quick.
Okay.
On this side is going to be connected TV devices where we have Roku's, Fire Sticks, LG, Samsung, Sony, all these folks.
Okay.
And then on this side, we're going to put video on demand on a cable box, Charter, Cox, Altice, Spectrum, all those folks.
Okay.
So let's stay on the connected TV side for right now. For the most part, any publisher that you're running on, Sling, Hulu, Pluto, NBC, CBS, a large amount of their inventory is going to be on-demand inventory. Some of it might be live stream. So like if you're partnering with a Sling, a lot of that is like it's very similar to the linear live stream feed. You're serving ads during that time, but you're also serving a lot of your ads in their on-demand content. So if someone has a Sling subscription, goes to Discovery Channel and queues up an on-demand Naked and Afraid episode, and you serve an ad during that, it's technically on demand, but it's also connected television. So just know that if you're spending on CTV now, probably a lot of your stuff's on demand.
Okay.
So now let's go to this side. This side is when we're focusing on the cable boxes and the satellite boxes. The on-demand programming there is so close to getting programmatic, but it's not there yet. So generally, the way you're going to access that inventory is by calling up, your local TV sales provider, calling those cable companies directly, and placing ads there. However, I could say personally at the trade desk, we're making a lot of progress to unlock that inventory to make it available so you can purchase it through the trade desk and purchase it through NetSertive. Maybe it's something I haven't shared with you guys yet, Peter.
Well, awesome.
So breaking news for all of us here.
We're all learning something today. That's great.
Yeah, that's right.
So when you think about the bidding strategies and targeting, let's ask a question like this. So for example, is there any benefit to utilizing a unique CTV unit type, like a selector unit, or using standard CTV inventory? Is that equally as effective? What are your thoughts there?
Can you give me what was the first alternative?
Like a CTV unit type of like a selector unit versus potentially just standard CTV inventory. Is all CTV inventory the same? Or are there different types of bidding and buying strategies that people should be thinking about?
It's a good question. It kind of goes back to what your KPI is. So if your KPI is really about driving action, then basically all the optimizations are at your fingertips. Mm-hmm. Let's go ahead and shift budget among publishers. Let's go ahead and weight time of days differently. Like, I don't want to pay the same amount of money for somebody who's seeing an ad between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. than 2 p.m. and 3 p.m. Okay. Like, that's kind of just basic stuff for us that you can totally apply to like how you weight different CTV inventory differently. Mm-hmm. And then when it comes to local businesses, I would say mid to small businesses, sometimes advertising can appeal to your ego as a business owner. or as an advertiser. Sometimes you really want your logo among the best content out there. And if that's important to you, great. Like, you can make that happen through programmatic. You can pick and choose your logos that you want to be alongside of. So that's also available to you now.
Which is interesting to the next question and the next topic we have. So John put this question in at the perfect time. So John's my straight man today.
Okay.
Specifically with reporting, and the great thing is he's got the word performance in his question. So there's some nuances to this question, and I love this because we have this dialogue with our customers. So Tomas, if we're targeting for a specific product demo and or intent, how is performance the best way to be measured, and how can we track attribution? So I'm thinking about, do I want to land a product demo from a customer, or I want to understand intent? How do you measure performance, and how do you kind of get in there and adjust those things and track it through attribution?
If I'll get to attribution, but I want to cover one use case first.
Okay.
Let's say that you just don't have that big of audience.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you have a pretty specialized product. If you had to guess, the only people in your 3 DMAs that are available, or the amount of people between your 3 DMAs to be qualified to purchase this large boat or something like that, is only about 100,000 people. Really, like, that's, and maybe that's your goal. Maybe your goal is, I want to reach all 100,000 people or 100,000 households, and I want to show them 5 ads every week for the next 3 months. And like, I want to do awareness, but I want to like really zero in on the qualified people. Mm-hmm. That might be a great way to measure performance, is like narrow down the zip codes of where they're going to live, put, try like, and shoot for hitting that optimal frequency for a certain time allotted. So that's kind of like a micro targeted awareness play, but I'll put that to the side. Then when we talk about performance, largely we're going to rely on action, and we're going to rely on digital based actions. So somebody visiting a website, someone getting to a product page, someone downloading an application, those are going to be digital based actions. And what we'll want to see, what we'll want to measure is, for however much money I spent in my advertising, how did those dollars translate into number of actions? Mm-hmm. And then you take a number of actions, I think, and then you divide by the amount of budget you spent, and then that's when you get a cost per action. And that cost per action is generally going to be your performance standard. Now, what's tough is you might not have a benchmark going into it. You might not have in your head, well, I think if somebody visits my website, that's going to be worth $350 to me. Might not be something you have off the top of your head. So part of it is starting the journey of understanding what is possible, and then benchmarking from there, and then drilling down to performance. It's hard to go from 0 to measuring performance perfectly in one campaign. It has to be a cyclical learning cycle.
So that leads to a couple interesting comments. So Brian, again, chimed in, audience first, all caps. I love that, right? So understanding the audience. And then David has a question about which verticals have the most success using CTV, which I'll preface that with, when you were talking about performance, it really has to do, again, with this comprehensive digital marketing strategy. If you do CTV in a vacuum, you have a certain number of metrics you can look at, and you can tune against those metrics. When you really want to talk about performance overall campaign structure, that's where we talked about early on this kind of secret sauce we're working on together, Tomas, of understanding that when someone is searching, let's just, for example, say a BMW Series 3 or 3 Series, when they watch their connected TV in a few minutes later, and that ad pops up with that model they were looking for at the local shop, and then they go back because they were triggered to go back and then get in and request an appointment or a demo and fill out a form or make a phone call, that performance is a game changer, right? Now you've got this two-way connection between your traditional digital funnel, your CTV campaign structure, and now you can really start to tune whether you're looking for, like, again, as John asked, a product demo or understanding what intent is. It's really, really complex. I think that's why we sit down with our customers, because they get to a point and they throw their hands up and go, I don't even know what ingredient to put in here first, let alone how to mix it or how long to bake it. And it takes time, it takes constant iteration. And that's why we're writing some code together that hasn't been written before. So
That's right.
when you think about CTV and you think about verticals that perform well, where do you guys typically see the best performance in what markets?
The earliest adopters were what we call D2C companies,
Okay.
direct to consumer. So you guys are probably seeing the rise of the new mattress company, like Casper mattress,
Sure.
Helix mattress. These are the guys who they're not Serta, they're not like Mattress Land. They don't take national ad buys. What they do is they focus on specific DMAs, a specific, millennial demographic, and they don't necessarily care about where they run. They just want to make sure their media gives a return on investment. And because CTV has that addressable and attribution component, those were the early adopters to connected television.
Mm-hmm.
I would say if you find your business is in a similar, has similar characteristics, where you really want to you really have a clear digital action that you want to drive.
Mm-hmm.
You really want to focus on return on ad spend, and don't necessarily care about like, being the sponsor for this local news segment or something. It's going to be, CTV is going to be a really good channel for you. But I will say that on my side, I deal with the national tier. It's the who's who of TV programmers. We
Sure.
have the largest CPG companies, the largest insurance companies, beverage, QSR. It's the gamut, really.
Sure. That's a great transition to the next question, which is local versus national CTV campaigns.
Sure.
And how do you break that down? How do you make spend recommendations? What does the content look like? What are your thoughts with clients when they're trying to figure out the mix between local and national?
Advertise where you have presence. If you got brick and mortar, you do not need to take a national TV ad buy where you don't have brick and mortar on the ground. I think the classic example that people always come up with is Sonic.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think like I live in New York, and friends who like they'll get a national Sonic commercial, and they're like, as teenagers or as middle schoolers, they're like, dang it, why don't we have a Sonic in this town? We really want a Sonic.
Right.
So you don't have to. It's still okay to do a national TV commercial, especially like during big tentpole events like football games and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like really, really impactful, and you might be able to create a national dialogue if the creative is good enough. I think like playoff sports is a really good example of that, when you see a funny basketball commercial or something. So if that's part of your strategy, go national. But if you don't have a national footprint, you do have the option to still run among great sports content, still run among the great broadcaster content, but only in the geographies that you're looking to advertise in. The other piece I'll just add real quick on that is I can't wait for auto specifically for tier 1 and tier 2 and tier 3 to share data.
Yeah.
I cannot wait for them to share data. I want tier 1, when their ads go out, to them go to tier 2 and be like, these are all the households I hit. And then tier 2 goes, okay, I got it from here. Like, it's just not happening yet, but I think we will get there.
Well, and the power of doing this for a large national brand with physical locations or presence in different markets is we can take that asset and then we can customize it on the fly depending on where that person is viewing it. And then we can actually partner, as you mentioned, whether it's a tier 2 auto supplier or tier 3 dealership, or tier 3 auto group or dealership. We can do the same thing with any large retail or franchise brand, and in coordination say, look, the brand is going to run this brand awareness campaign in your regions. Time for you to crank up X, Y, and Z digital strategies to capture more form fills or phone calls and double down and build off that. If they're not done together, the local retailer goes, I don't even know that was happening. How is that not coordinated with me? Why is that? And that's the advantage of working with a partner to really drive that thoughtful strategy together.
Totally agree. It's been a decades-long challenge, but I think we have greener pastures ahead.
Another great question here, Tomas. I think somebody keyed off the fact that you're in New York. For franchise locations opening in large markets, for example, New York City, traditional TV is often cost prohibitive. Would CTV be a more affordable option?
If you have a good idea who your audience is,
Mhm.
that's my answer. Is if you're opening a store, high-end retail store that is only going to cater to, you can kind of guess the zip codes, you can kind of guess the characteristics of your audience. CTV is a great option.
Sure.
If you're looking just to create buzz around town, local television might be the way to go, or local outdoor might be the way to go.
Okay, good. So the next question about creative considerations for CTV, one of the things that we like to share with our customers is you want to present an ad when you have something relevant to talk about. So the fact that we can present a specific product, whether it's a car or a mattress or a boat, when that inventory is available, means now, as you discussed earlier in the broadcast, I am offering something to that consumer when they need it. I'm not offering anything back if I don't have anything to offer. In other words, we see a lot of challenges with e-commerce as well as local TV local advertising when they haven't matched their inventory with buyers in market. So as they're creating assets, it's really important. What other advice do you give to customers when they're thinking about creative inside of CTV campaigns?
Similar to I think it's a theme that we've been talking about. Just know that there's more options to learn. There's a better ability to learn because you have that type of feedback loop of this ad drove this action. You can test a variety of different creatives. Not something that you can do with linear television because you don't have that feedback loop. So just when you're sitting there, like with your creative agency and you're coming up with different options, normally they'll probably give you 3 different options of creative to work with. Take whatever's on the cutting room floor.
Yeah.
Let's get 6, 8, 10 different creatives and spend the first 10% of our campaign just seeing what works.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned earlier, which was helpful, repurpose your linear TV assets right now.
Totally.
Get out there and test it. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's the same thing we would do in any dynamic ad creation in any one of our other markets.
Yeah,
So
that's right.
we're wrapping up here in our time slot, and our last slide would be questions. But I think we've received several questions, and want to make sure we wrap this thing up with a minute left. If any other questions want to pop in, I'd like to thank Tomas for really spending an hour with us and our audience, and for Jason for producing this. And appreciate all the questions.
Peter,
if anybody has a last minute question.
I actually have a question for you. This
Yes,
is how I like to end my panels and my speaking engagements. You got to give me the last connected TV ad supported program that you watched.
Well, I watched live college football this weekend.
There you go. Oh, was it how did you watch it? Like Roku or
YouTube TV?
YouTube TV. There we go. All right.
Yeah. And we talked about this earlier, Tomas. I was frustrated when I saw the gray box come up with the standard music that said "ad should be here."
Yeah.
Inventory wasn't available.
Right. I know. My team looks at each other and we're like, we're not done yet. We got a long way to go.
Yeah. So there are audiences out there, and there is inventory available for anybody listening. This is a time to be doubling down on CTV. It's a dynamic audience that's growing quickly. So thank you, everybody, for your time. If you have any questions, please feel free to look up myself or Tomas on LinkedIn, and we'd be happy to answer any further questions. All right.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Tomas. Appreciate it. Great job.